Okay, let's get right into it. Today, we are tackling a massive topic, a truly pervasive cultural phenomenon, the modern mindfulness industry.
It's everywhere. You can't escape it.
You really can't. And our mission for this deep dive is to use the source material we have to really understand just the overwhelming scope of it. We want to analyze why the word itself, mindfulness, has become so incredibly ambiguous.
And then from there, really dig into the philosophical critique that asks, what is this elixir of mindfulness actually made of, if anything?
The source material uses this fantastic term, the mindfulness juggernaut. And that image is it's spot on.
It really is a juggernaut that's just, rolled joyously across the entire landscape of late capitalism, claiming huge amounts of cultural territory along the way.
And the breadth of that conquest is what the author really focuses on. It's managed to sideline entire established industries, right?
Oh, absolutely. Think about the ground it's taken over. Territory that used to belong to a really diverse patchwork of other guides.
Like who, for instance?
Well, you're talking shanks, you're talking self-help gurus of all stripes, priests, ministers.
Yogis, traditional meditation teachers.
And crucially, even traditional Buddhists themselves.
No.
The key point the material makes is that nothing else seems to be able to compete with this single, incredibly adaptable concept.
It's like it absorbed the functions of all of them.
Exactly. It distilled them down and then repackaged them for universal consumption.
And that ability to just dominate the market seems to stem directly from the almost utopian level of the promises attached to it. The source material points to the marketing language, the websites, the books.
The language is just extraordinary. It suggests that a dose of mindfulness, or a very large helping, can do two completely different but equally desirable things at the same time.
Okay, what are they?
First, it can enhance your joy and appreciation of everyday life, make the mundane feel brilliant. But second, at the same time, it can equip you to deal with life's absolute toughest challenges when they come up.
And that right there, that's the crucial culture we have to investigate today. That's the structural tension of the whole thing. How can one seemingly simple cognitive quality promise to do so much? It's not just a solution. It's marketed as a universal panacea.
The single fix for every human problem, from, minor daily stress to a major existential crisis.
Right. And when a single concept is marketed as the solution for both the spiritual emptiness of modern life and a company's quarterly financial reports,
then you absolutely have to apply a critical lens. You have to ask how this tiny cognitive component got loaded up with the significance of an entire worldview.
To really start to understand the sheer force of this industry, we have to look at the universal application it promises. The source material very meticulously details this incredibly vast and diverse range of human activities.
It's a list that the industry suggests mindfulness can significantly impact, and the scope is it's shocking.
It really is staggering. It borders on being completely comprehensive. If you had any doubt that mindfulness was being sold as a kind of universal solvent, this list would just erase it.
And it starts with the most intensely personal things. We're talking about enhancing activities as different as, say, caregiving, or approaching dying and death with grace, and even sex.
So moments of profound vulnerability and intimacy.
Right, and then it moves straight from there into the social and the domestic. So you've got mindful approaches to parenting, to general healing, health maintenance.
Navigating intimate relationships.
The clear message is that mindfulness is the critical ingredient to make all of those experiences better.
But the list doesn't stop there in the personal sphere, does it?
Yeah.
It makes this huge leap.
It leaps directly into the economic and the professional. So now we find applications for consumerism and finances. If you're an entrepreneur or you want to boost creativity in the workplace, there's a mindful path for that.
Workforce performance, political activism, it's all in there.
Even activities that you'd think were just purely functional are brought under this umbrella. Cooking and eating, mindful eating, of course.
Of course.
Education, protecting the environment, and even working with prisoners are all listed as being significantly improved by mindfulness.
So the underlying implication is unmistakable. Whatever you are doing.
Doing it mindfully improves it. It validates it. It brings you closer to well-being. It's basically a prerequisite for a fulfilling life, no matter what you're doing.
And this is where that overwhelming list of applications creates such a startling contrast with, just ordinary common language. It forms the central paradox that the material really forces us to confront.
Absolutely. If you strip away all the industry marketing, what does the word mindful actually mean in a normal, everyday conversation?
In our regular pre-juggernaut language, being mindful is just associated with very ordinary, non-utopian cognitive functions.
It just means paying attention to something, being attentive, exercising a bit of caution, maybe just being courteous. It's a simple, functional command for your brain.
It's not something that usually requires a 5-day retreat or a special curriculum. I remember reading the anecdote the author provided to illustrate this simple pre-revolution usage.
Oh, that was brilliant. The author notes that the only time they ever heard the term used in earnest before this whole explosion happened was a grandmother yelling, "Be mindful of the time," as they were running out to play.
Or be mindful of your manners when you're visiting someone.
Yeah.
Just basic social or temporal awareness.
And that contrast is just phenomenal. On one hand, you have the simple functional instruction to check the clock, a momentary act of paying attention.
And on the other, the industry is tacitly suggesting that this exact same mental quality is the foundation of a modern-day utopia.
Which forces the question, can this simple, ordinary mental quality, just being attentive, really be the first cause of a utopian new age?
Does the simple act of remembering the time or being polite somehow intrinsically link to profound spiritual, psychological, and even financial well-being?
It seems like an absolutely enormous conceptual leap. The idea that basic attentiveness holds the key to success in everything from entrepreneurship to facing death. It implies that the entire human condition, across every single domain, is fundamentally broken just because of a simple lack of attention.
Which, when you put it like that, suggests a certain, I don't know, intellectual laziness in the diagnosis.
Exactly. If the solution is just be more aware, then the problem must be you're not aware enough. But human suffering and existential anxiety are rarely that simple. It requires the significant act of cultural loading, of piling meaning onto a simple word, to bridge that gap between checking the time and achieving enlightenment.
And that loading of significance is precisely what leads the critique to its next logical step.
Analyzing the stability of the term itself.
This is where we move from just observing the market reach to analyzing the intellectual structure of the concept. Because if mindfulness can be stretched to mean absolutely everything,
then the source material suggests that maybe it means nothing at all in any precise sense. The term, in the hands of the industry, has become what the author calls a classic floating signifier.
we absolutely need to spend time defining what that means because it is the linchpin of the entire critique.
It's a really powerful analytical tool, and it's borrowed from the visual semiotician Daniel Chandler. He articulates it as a signifier with a vague, highly variable, unspecifiable, or non-existent signified.
Okay, let's break that down with a non-academic analogy first, which the critique itself suggests. Think of a word like authenticity.
Good one.
Everyone agrees authenticity is good. We all want to be authentic. That word authenticity is the signifier.
But what exactly is an authentic person? To a fashion brand, it might be wearing distressed jeans that cost $500. To a spiritual guru, it means finding your true self in a cave somewhere. To a teenager, it's rejecting all mainstream consumerism.
The word itself is culturally agreed upon, but it's empty. It's void of any single precise thing, the signified, that it actually points to.
So when you apply that to mindfulness, the term itself is agreed upon. We all use the word. But because it doesn't point to a single fixed practice or definition, it's run through with what the source calls empty signification.
And this emptiness is its genius from a marketing perspective. It's what allows the term to be filled with any sense desired by the user.
You bring your spiritual need, your psychological need, your corporate need to the term, and the industry just assures you that mindfulness is the container that holds the answer. It becomes a vessel for whatever you need it to be.
And to really prove this conceptual instability, the source material meticulously categorized the various meanings of mindfulness that it found just by looking at the industry's own content. The result is it's an overwhelming, salmagundacious smorgasbord of ideas.
A conceptual hash that really struggles for any kind of coherence. And we should delve into those categories because they're the concrete evidence. They really lay bare the chasm between the ordinary meaning and the utopian promise. The first category focuses on mental operations.
Okay, and this is the one closest to the ordinary meaning we talked about earlier.
Right, exactly. Under mental operations, mindfulness includes basic cognitive functions like ordinary awareness, paying attention, concentration, changing your focus, observing the contents of your own mind.
And the very important element of freedom from judgment.
Right. These are mostly internal, cerebral, functional processes. It's about how your mind works.
But then the second category, just concealing, it shifts gears completely. It moves from the cerebral to the ethical. This one is all about behavior.
And here, mindfulness is described using terms like kindness, compassion, common consideration, love, deep listening, slowing down.
Niceness, just being good.
Wait, right there. That's the conceptual earthquake. So the same word is being used to mean simply concentrating on something.
And also to mean enacting love and common consideration towards other people. That's not a slight difference. That's a vast chasm between simple cognitive attention and complex moral behavior.
It is a massive leap. Being attentive is one thing, and acting love and compassion is a whole other thing. How does focusing your attention suddenly translate into an ethical framework of being good? The term is doing double duty. It's trying to be both a state of mind and a system of ethics.
Then we get to the third category, which tries to ground the whole thing in tradition, but often fails through just being too general. This category is traditional practices.
Right. And this is where the origins are supposed to be, but the terms are so vague. Various forms of Buddhist meditation, generalized unspecified meditation, contemplation, various styles of yoga.
That vagueness is critical, isn't it? It avoids any real commitment.
It does. They refer to various forms or generalized meditation to suggest a link to ancient authority without ever having to grapple with the specific, often rigorous, philosophical, and ethical requirements of those actual traditions. It's like reference without commitment.
And finally, we get to the fourth category, which is maybe the most illustrative of the floating nature of this signifier, indistinct something or others.
This is where the language becomes truly amorphous, almost poetic. The terms here are things like openness, relating more effectively to thoughts and feelings, loving kindness, going inward, letting go, acceptance, truly seeing someone.
Minding mind, being in the moment, being moment to moment, and my favorite, simply just being.
It's definition through just proliferation. It's a kind of conceptual chaos. If mindfulness requires you to list all of those things, cognitive states, behaviors, traditional practices, and these vague spiritual aspirations, it just proves that no single definition is enough.
And the irony of this overload is profound, which the source material highlights brilliantly.
What's that?
The industry is presenting this massive contradictory list of practices and intentions to readers who are supposedly seeking mindfulness because they're already distracted, scattered, and attention deficient.
It's honestly bewildering. The solution for your attention deficit starts with a conceptually fragmented definition that itself demands immense attention just to sort out where to even begin. The author jokes that the editors of these mindful industry sites seem to have forgotten to take their Adderall.
The sheer lack of focus in defining the core term is just stunning.
And this context of conceptual instability is what makes the perspective of Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's often called the progenitor of this whole movement, so critical. When he defines mindfulness, he explicitly moves away from specific methods or techniques.
His statement is very definitive and insightful. Mindfulness, he says, is explicitly not a technique.
Instead, he presents it as a way of being, a way of seeing, a way of knowing.
Which, while that sounds philosophically moving, it only serves to deepen the ambiguity, doesn't it? If it's a way of being, then it's not something you do in a structured, teachable way. It's an entire orientation to life.
And how do you market a way of being to a consumer who's looking for that definable, easily acquired dose of the elixir?
You market the promise of it. You use the floating signifier to ensure that whatever state of existence the consumer is striving for, mindfulness can accommodate it. This conceptual slipperiness is totally foundational to its success.
The journey to understanding this vacuity of the term really starts with the formal definition provided by Jon Kabat-Zinn himself in his foundational work, Coming to Our Senses.
And it's so critical to look at the exact wording that really established this cultural trend and to analyze its structure.
The definition is a bit long, but it's precise. Mindfulness can be thought of as moment-to-moment, non-judgmental awareness, cultivated by paying attention in a specific way, that is, in the present moment, and as non-reactively, as non-judgmentally, and as open-heartedly as possible.
It sounds so comprehensive, so encompassing. But the source material notes that the continued emptiness of the term can actually be traced right back to this very definition. It suggests vague, platitudinous, and most importantly, circular.
It's circular because it defines the quality of awareness by immediately using synonyms for awareness. If you really dissect it, it defines mindfulness as awareness, which is cultivated by paying attention.
And then attention is qualified as being non-judgmental, but then moments later, the final clause requires you to be as non-judgmentally as possible.
It's like defining blue as the quality of being blue. The structure relies on reinforcing the concept through near repetition and just layering on desirable qualities, rather than pinning it down with a specific external action that you could definitively measure or teach.
It functions more like a mantra, really, a powerful verbal invocation of a desirable state rather than a rigorous scientific definition that could form the basis of a standardized medical or psychological intervention.
Its power is in its spiritual and emotional resonance, not its intellectual clarity.
And to explore the consequences of this kind of definitional emptiness, the source material introduces this brilliant anthropological analogy. It brings in the work of the French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss and his concept of the prototypical empty signifier, mana.
Lévi-Strauss is essential here. He was the originator of the technical term floating signifier itself. And he used the Polynesian concept of mana as the perfect example of such an empty signifier.
So understanding mana helps us understand the cultural function of mindfulness today.
Exactly. We need to explain the original Polynesian concept. Mana was used broadly by Pacific Islanders to denote the mysterious, the unknowable, the invisible stuff of life.
So like a spiritual power, a force.
Yes, an animating essence that ran through and sort of validated certain things, people and actions. The more mana a chief or a weapon or a ritual possessed, the more powerful it was. So acquiring more mana meant greater well-being, success, and vitality.
It was literally the animating elixir, the spiritual fuel for existence. I mean, that draws an incredibly powerful, immediate parallel to the modern-day promises of mindfulness.
Vitalizing everything from caregiving to finance. And just like the modern industry, there was an entire social structure built around manipulating this concept. People, shamans, priests, powerful figures who said they knew how to acquire, manipulate, or distribute this mysterious, elixir-like stuff were particularly sought after.
That role is strikingly similar to our modern mediators and gurus, isn't it? They are the figures who claim to know how to manage the invisible, universally beneficial force that resides in all of life.
The source material is quite explicit in drawing this parallel. It's the cultural function that matters. Both terms, mana and mindfulness, describe this amorphous, invisible quality that's necessary for success, which can be acquired through ritual or instruction, and which explains virtually all forms of success and well-being.
But wait, isn't the entire goal of modern mindfulness, particularly in things like mindfulness-based stress reduction or MBSR, to be secular and evidence-based? That analogy to an ancient magical elixir feels incredibly provocative, maybe even unfair to the science that is trying to validate some of these practices.
That's a fair point. And it brings us to Lévi-Strauss's ultimate critique of mana. He wasn't dismissing the cultural practices of the Polynesians. He was critiquing the word's functionality. His observation was that mana came to explain far too much in human culture.
How so?
Since virtually anything having to do with power or animation or mysterious success could be tagged with mana, the concept itself lost its explanatory power. It tried to encompass everything.
So the critique isn't saying mindfulness is magic. It's saying mindfulness functions culturally like a magic word.
Precisely. If mindfulness can be successfully applied to everything from finance to dog training, and if it explains success and well-being in every single domain we listed earlier, then the question is posed. Is mindfulness behaving like mana? Is it an amorphous floating signifier that just hovers around this concept of the animating elixir of life, promising universal power without ever specifying a rigorous external mechanism? And that reframing seeing mindfulness not just as a set of practices, but as a placeholder for the mysterious source of modern well-being, that's the fundamental aha moment of this critique.
It explains why we rush to buy it. We're not just buying a technique, we're buying the container for the mysterious elixir.
It perfectly articulates how a word born of simplicity can be co-opted and culturally inflated until it's so heavy with meaning that it paradoxically becomes empty of any single stable definition.
We've really established the conceptual instability. Now let's connect that instability to the industry's shaky historical foundations. A crucial area of analysis in the material is the industry's relationship with its source, Buddhism.
The common narrative, the one that's usually told, is all about the great separation of modern secular mindfulness from the spiritual realm. The story goes that these practices were adapted from Buddhism, but presented in entirely secular terms.
And this is largely due to Jon Kabat-Zinn's pioneering work with patients suffering from chronic health problems using approaches like MBSR.
And the reason for that secularization was strategic. It was tactical. This move allowed mindfulness to escape the religious, New Age, or hippie connotations that can sometimes put people off meditation.
It made it palatable, applicable in hospitals, corporate boardrooms, military programs, schools, all without the baggage of religion or the counterculture.
The problem, according to this critique, is that the separation is just not nearly as clear-cut as the industry says it is. The source material, which comes from the perspective of what's termed speculative non-Buddhism, presents a very strong counter-argument.
The critique suggests that the mindfulness industry has set up camp much too closely to what the source calls the great spiritualist valation within which Buddhism and its brood are ensconced.
That word, valation, it implies a defensive wall, a fortress. So the critique is saying the industry is pretending it's outside the fortress walls of spiritual tradition, but it's really just hanging out in the moat.
Exactly. Despite the secular branding, the spiritual undertones and often overt language are clearly still there, especially when you move away from the strictest clinical programs and look at the broader market.
And the evidence for this is provided by just scanning the overtly spiritual language found on the industry's own websites, particularly on pages for spirituality or deeper living.
It's pretty hard to claim you're secularly neutral when you're using language like this. Essential self, psyche, soul, essence.
Spiritual teacher, spiritual practice, prayer, transcendental knowledge.
True self, true mind, contemplation, grace, oneness, and even God.
Those are not the standard terms of empirical psychology or cognitive behavioral therapy or corporate management theory. They are highly charged spiritual terms.
This suggests that while some practitioners do successfully distill a purely secular form of the practice, the overall mindfulness industry is clearly still run through with the religious, the new age, and the hippie sensibilities it supposedly tried to escape.
It really seems like the industry is trying to tap into that deep human desire for spiritual fulfillment, the very thing late capitalism often fails to provide, while at the same time marketing itself as a scientifically validated product that's free of any spiritual commitment.
And this brings us to what the source calls the ambiguous affiliation, the industry's required nod to Buddhism. If the practice is truly secular, why the constant, almost compulsory need to mention the Buddhist origins?
The source finds this need baffling. Is it just polite acknowledgement, a search for legitimation, trying to leverage the cultural authority of an ancient tradition to boost modern sales?
That seems more likely.
Or, as the material suggests, is it coming from an agonistic anxiety of influence, this discomfort of a new movement, realizing it's borrowing heavily from a powerful predecessor, and it's struggling to define its own unique identity?
It's unsure if it's an adapter, an heir, or just a repackager.
And this confusion gets compounded by the conflicting rhetoric you see in industry articles, which try to bridge this chasm between the spiritual past and the secular present. The source highlights some really problematic article titles and slogans.
Like what?
Well, look at this title. Curing your illness is all in your mindfulness. That's a direct, causal, and potentially dangerous link between a mental practice and a concrete health outcome.
It moves from stress reduction to a claim of a cure. That's a massive, unsubstantiated leap that sounds more like religious faith healing than scientific medicine.
And more to the point, what are we supposed to make of articles that use the phrase ancient wisdom proven by modern medicine? The critique sees this as a really problematic conflation designed to maximize market appeal.
It's trying to leverage the cultural authority of ancient wisdom, implying age, depth, spiritual gravitas, while at the same time requiring the authority of modern medicine, implying science, neutrality, and empirical validation.
The industry wants to have its spiritual cake and eat its secular one, too. It wants the exotic allure of the East and the sterile, trustworthy validation of the Western laboratory.
So the overall effect is just a profound muddying of the waters for the consumer. You, the listener, are left wondering, am I engaging in a neutral mental exercise, a spiritual practice, a medically proven treatment, or a path to social ethics?
And the industry seems to want the answer to be all of the above, which is the surest sign that the concept is functioning as a floating signifier.
It's using the ambiguity strategically. By being everything to everyone, it ensures maximum market penetration, and it avoids the difficult, messy intellectual work of defining precisely what it is and what it is not.
This deep analysis of the industry's structure and language all culminates in this razor-sharp sociological critique, drawing on the French social theorist Jean-Gabriel Guattard.
So we're moving from linguistics and anthropology to mass cultural theory.
Right. Guattard is a fascinating figure who, long before mass media, coined the term group mind to understand how herd behavior and crowd psychology work. His work is all about imitation and suggestion as the driving forces of cultural change.
And his theories help explain why this industry has been so wildly and immediately successful. The source suggests the industry lays its tracks in what Dotard called the grooves of borrowed thought.
That concept is so crucial. It suggests that the mindfulness industry isn't really inventing anything new. It's not creating radically new optimisms. Instead, it is highly skilled at repackaging and rebranding existing optimisms.
Ideas of self-improvement, self-actualization, emotional resilience, things that have been circulating in Western culture for decades.
Exactly. Think about the American tradition of self-help, which goes back over a century. We already have these cultural grooves established for the desire for quick fixes, the emphasis on positive thinking, the idea that success is a psychological state you can learn.
It's an issue of rebranding and recycling. By fitting perfectly into these already existing grooves of expectation, the cultural desire for a simple internal key to happiness, the industry requires very little revolutionary effort to gain acceptance.
It's giving the consumer exactly what they were already primed to want.
And this context leads to the final comprehensive assessment of the entire mindfulness project in the source material. It's a highly compressed, very sharp summary. The entire movement is seen as a neo-Carnegian, quasi-pseudo-Buddhist, quasi-self-actualization hall of mirrors.
Wow. Okay, that is a phrase that demands careful unpacking, piece by piece.
Let's do it. First, the hall of mirrors implies endless, often distorting reflection. It suggests what you're seeing isn't a core truth, but just a series of recursive reflections of your own desires and the industry's borrowings.
Okay, then neo-Carnegian. This refers to the Dale Carnegie tradition, right? Early 20th century self-help, salesmanship, networking, achieving success through applied psychological techniques. It's practical, success-driven, corporate optimism.
Then the quasi-pseudo-Buddhist part refers to that ambiguous affiliation we just discussed, borrowing practices and legitimacy, without fully adopting the underlying philosophy or rigorous tradition. It's the spiritual flavor without the spiritual commitment.
And finally, self-actualization ties it directly to that mid-20th century psychological movement, maybe most famously associated with Maslow and humanistic psychology, the focus on reaching one's full personal and spiritual potential.
So the critique synthesizes it all. The industry is a system that combines corporate self-help, lightly flavored Eastern spirituality, and psychological self-improvement, all reflecting and distorting each other in a complex, profitable marketplace.
It's not one thing, it's a composite built on borrowed desires. And that marketplace, the source observes, is thriving by feeding off a specific kind of societal craving. It calls it the multi-billion-dollar addiction of the desiccated 21st century middle classes for anything that promises to lead them to the promised land of well-being.
That word desiccated is not just poetic, it's brutal. It implies this kind of emotional, spiritual, relational dryness, a profound state of lacking, often caused by the pressures of late capitalism. And this industry rushes in to fill that existential void.
And that explains the demand side of the equation. When a population feels fragmented, distracted, and unfulfilled, they become highly susceptible to a single, simple concept that promises holistic integration and complete well-being. The very ambiguity of the floating signifier becomes its greatest market strength because it can accommodate any form of desiccation the consumer is feeling.
But we do need to clarify the focus of this entire critique before we conclude. The source material is very explicit in its nuance.
This is a vital point.
The critique is aimed squarely at the industry, the market, the gurus, the ambiguous definitions, and the vagueness of the term mindfulness as a floating signifier.
The author is explicitly not opposed to practices that cultivate salutary forms of life that are beneficial, healthy, and promote human flourishing. In fact, the source notes that it places the highest premium on such practices. And one such practice is, for lack of a better term, focused attention or meditation.
That distinction is so important. It means we're not dismissing the positive cognitive effects of focused attention or concentration or non-judgmental awareness itself. We are dissecting the cultural vehicle, the industry, the marketing, the conceptual fragmentation that has commercialized and complicated the language around that simple practice.
We're separating the practice from the profit motive and the conceptual inflation. The core message is that if you pursue these practices, you should be critical of the language around them. You should ensure you're seeking actual substantive change rather than just subscribing to the latest iteration of borrowed optimism.
What an incredible deep dive into a phenomenon that really touches almost every aspect of modern life. So to summarize for you, the listener, we started by acknowledging the expansive utopian claims of mindfulness across death, sex, and finance. And then we move to this rigorous analysis that identifies the terms instability as a floating signifier.
We explored the structural emptiness of the term using that long list of contradictory definitions to show the vast conceptual chasm between, say, attention and ethics. We traced its cultural function back to that anthropological parallel of mana, the animating elixir, to show how concepts that explain everything can end up explaining nothing with any precision.
We then confronted the deep, unresolved tension between its secular presentation and its spiritual language, showing how the industry is this hall of mirrors, reflecting corporate optimism, vague spiritualism, and humanistic self-actualization, all tailored to the craving of a desiccated middle class.
The immense value of this deep dive lies in recognizing that powerful cultural forces often rely on terms that are deliberately vague to maximize their applicability and their profit. It's how cultural concepts scale so quickly.
Precisely. By knowing how and why mindfulness became a floating signifier, you are now equipped to engage with any book, course, or corporate training under that banner more critically, ensuring you seek genuine, grounded substance over ambiguous, empty signification.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought to consider. If a concept becomes so universally applicable, from corporate finance to intimacy to working with prisoners, that it completely loses its specific agreed-upon definition, does that ubiquity make it the most powerful cultural idea of our time because it resonates with everyone, or does it make it the most empty because it commits to nothing? Think about how critically we approach new elixirs for well-being, and what intellectual precision we sacrifice when we embrace ambiguity in exchange for the promise of a complete solution.